Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Attack Action Podcast, Deck Tech. Today we have Mitch with his Iris Dromai brew and Colin in the background making the magic happen. How's it going, Mitch?
Hey, pretty good, Isaac. How you doing?
Good. So you recently took this deck to 3 different pro quests and had some success with it. I got to say that when you first started brewing this deck, I was like, what? But
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
actually good.
it's like kind of between good and a meme still. Yeah, I was on Katsu after on during the San Jose calling, and after that, I was just pretty sick of losing to Ice and losing to Oldhim. So um, I was tinkering around with Katsu, and then I ran into this thing on Talishar, and it was pretty inspiring. I got stomped by this rounds on me. I was like, there's something to this. I could do this. And so yeah, started tinkering, started brewing, and it actually turned into a real deck. So I'm pretty stoked.
Nice. Yeah. So, for anybody who doesn't know, tell us kind of what the overarching theme of the deck is. Like, what are you trying to do? Why Iris of Reality? What's your game plan here?
Well, the whole inspiration of the deck was the interaction with Burn the Ball, where it's an aura that you can swing with Iris that your opponent can't destroy. Of course, it eventually destroys itself, but the goal of the deck is kind of like Throwback Prism. You're trying to play out auras and swing them, and just generally play overvalued Phantasm attacks.
Gotcha. And I assume against Guardian, maybe some less Phantasm attacks and more auras.
Yeah, you're just trying to flood the board state because they have a really hard time clearing it. They don't have the action points or to really get them off the board and threaten your life, so they get buried pretty quickly.
Okay, cool. So against any deck without a ton of poppers, you're capitalizing on the uh, overvalued illusionist cards with Phantasm, and then against any deck without much go again or action points, you're capitalizing on the Spectra mechanic of auras and swinging those as 4 go again weapons with Iris of Reality.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome how all of your blues become four go against. It's pretty rad. Uh,
Yeah, that's intense. Like if they don't respect you, 4 blue hand would just be 16 damage uh, every turn.
yeah, it is generally like 8 to 12, but yeah, it gets there pretty quick, and um, yeah, it's a pretty hard hill to climb for the opponent.
Yeah, definitely have to respect auras. Is one thing I've learned in this game.
Hmm.
Okay, so tell us the I guess the strengths and weaknesses of this deck, right? Like what are your good matchups, your bad matchups, what you do well, where it kind of falls apart.
Sure. Yeah, so the good matchups would be against Guardians, against Wizards, against Warriors and Rangers. Just generally the decks that have a hard time clearing the Spectras off, and the ones that really uh, how do I put it, um, that can't really deal with your high defensive plan, but also like high value plan with your 2 card hands being able to play out your auras and swing them. It's you build this board state that they just can't really remove, and you have like a pretty good defensive package on top of it. So if they try to just ignore you and go face, it's not really going to work out that well for them because you can block so well. Most of the deck blocks for 3. Um, the okay matchups would be um, this deck is actually kind of okay into ninjas and Briar. Um, it can flex aggressive just with its value attacks. I have seen like other deck techs like Howling Mines, he relies on more of a 2 card tall attack strategy, and this one it can flex more aggressive. It uses more go again. It uses spears and dune breakers to try to get a little more damage off on a 4 card hand instead of just having the 2 card hand to attack with. So um, I think you kind of need that against Vi, especially. You can just go way too fast. The bad matchups, uh, the mirror actually is probably the worst. There's just not a good way for this deck to clear off the dragons, and they have so many dragons on the board. It's easy for them to just pop an ore at the end of the turn, or they can also run quite a few poppers that hit your Phantasm attacks. So, uh, kind of either way, it's very hard against Dromai. Rhinar for the same reason. Decks that can generate the action points um, and have poppers are really your biggest weakness. So that is Dash and Rhinar. And to an extent, Viscerai. Viscerai is just mean. Runic Reclamation is just, it's a real bad card for you. Um,
Yeah, with no defense reaction in Arsenal, seven's a pretty mean break point. And
yeah.
yeah, Rhinos a bit scary for any Dromai deck because the Dromai really wants to block with very specific cards and play out other specific cards. So then when you get intimidated and you're left with like a passing Mirage in hand, you're like, well, this doesn't block very well and I need it. So I could see
hmm
that being a fairly bad matchup. And if they hit hot on scab skins, they get extra action points, which is especially good at dealing with what you're doing.
Yeah,
Um,
and they have those big turns where there's not a ton you can do.
yeah, definitely. Um, so how do you want to talk about this? Do you want to let's talk about the equipment you run first.
Sure. So fairly standard drum my package except for the chest piece. This runs Tunic as the main chest piece. The extra resource there is just so helpful in a lot of situations. Um, a big one could be just using the Tunic resource to pay for footsteps to get a block on a Phoenix Flame, or it could be um, using the Tunic resource to swing a Miraging Metamorph for 7. There's a lot of options for that Tunic resource, and the games tend to take a while, so you'll get at least 2, if not 3, 4 resources out of Tunic over the span of the game. Crown of Providence is just a really good piece of equipment. If you get a card stuck in your arsenal, uh, you can you can clear it out. It's that 2 block points really good. It allows you to change your game plan kind of mid game. If you see that, say for example, you've got a couple of auras out and you've got a defense reaction in arsenal and they're just trying to clear auras, like you can use your kind of providence if they ever swing at you to get that defense reaction out of arsenal and get a more aggressive card in there so you can flex back on them harder. The most important piece of equipment though I'd say is Wave of Reality, which is sneaky good in that um, it blocks for 2, but if you, especially on if you're going second, which I like to do into the aggressive matchups, um, you let it pop and it gives you a weapon to swing on the very first turn. That's the real strength of the card, is getting that spectral shield. Um, yeah, the ward can be kind of hard to deal with sometimes, um, but yeah, getting that weapon out is just key.
Yeah,
Should I talk?
that's a pretty sneaky interaction because as a regular old Regos Dromai player, um, making the spectral shield is nice because you're blocking a future hit effect potentially, but it just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything. So to have a piece of equipment on deck that starts your aura engine going right off the bat is actually really clutch.
Yeah, it's very cool, and it was something I didn't initially recognize until I saw it played and was like, wow, that's very cool. There's actually a lot of kind of moving pieces here that click together. Um, that I mean that I initially didn't recognize, but um, it's it's got some cool mechanics like the burn the mall thing. There's some depth to that with the haze bending. I'd say haze bending is probably the most important aura in your list, um, because creates it creates the shield when it gets popped, so it allows you to keep swinging the weapons. And the interaction with burn them all and haze bending is that it also makes a shield when it gets destroyed. So yeah, it's just about you want to keep at least one aura on the battlefield at all times if you can, because with 30 blues you're going to be running into hopefully 2 blues a turn and one of them to swing an aura with.
Gotcha. And I assume the Phantasmal Footsteps is for the spears and Dunebreaker insurance, correct?
Yeah, it's important in these aggressive matchups when you're also trying to flex kind of aggressive acts, like to have that insurance. Because yeah, if you take a big hit and you're expecting to play out a 4 or 5 card hand, and then you just get popped right off the bat, and there's nothing else you can do, um, I think you pretty much lose the game on the spot there if you don't have Phantasmal Footsteps. Um,
Right.
yeah, the Mage Master boots is what you use for the taller matchups, for the matchups that where you're trying to build your board state. Um, but yeah, building that board state against the aggressive matchup is not really what you're trying to do. Um,
Mhm.
it's just that the auras are too easy to pop, and just at the end of the turn they can shoot it with a pistol, they can hit it with a Phoenix Flame, and so that blue that blocks for 2 has now become a blue that blocks for 1, maybe 2, and eats your action point.
Yeah. Yeah, so this deck capitalizes on like two things that Illusionist does really well and are pretty unique to Illusionist, like the really overpowered or undercosted attacks are like really powerful if you playing them into a deck that can't exploit their weakness. And then the Aura game, as we all know from Prism, is just so strong into decks that have trouble manufacturing action points. So having this kind of hybrid deck that does both really well is, I mean, you're just cashing in on, the things Illusionist does really well in a pretty unique way, which I find really cool. Do
Yeah,
you want to is there anything about the main board here that you'd like to highlight or talk about? Any cards in particular that shine or maybe have interactions we wouldn't really consider?
sure. I'd like to highlight Enlighten Strike and Sink Below, uh, mostly for their ability uh, to cycle out your hand. That can be really important sometimes for maintaining tempo. Sometimes you brick on it all red hand or you brick on it all blue hand, and they just together don't make it all work. And E Strike and Sink Below can really patch that over and allow you to keep moving. Um, this deck can when it when it loses tempo, it's okay. You can just block and kind of get it back. Um, but those cards are really important for the hand fixing. Also, the red snatch is like it's just a great card to throw at the end of a turn and get that arsenal. It's kind of a curveball that is unexpected when you're like, okay, blue or for 4, blue or for 4, and then oh, snatch at the end, and I'm getting an arsenal. And I mean, it just it's a pretty hard hit when when they're not expecting and they're just kind of doing the value on when people are just blocking for value and like throwing equipment and auras. I've seen people do that sometimes. They think that the whole deck doesn't have any threats in it, so that snatch at the end is pretty good. Um, Also, Blue Dust Up is can be a sneaky good card because um, it can key off of Pierce Reality and get pumped, and it's a real attack, so it can get popped, and then creating that extra ash. And in the Wizard matchups, that extra ash wing can be pretty helpful. Um, the only thing this deck needs ash for is the 3 sand covers, and since you don't have to worry about making dragons, the sand covers just become an insanely good value card for getting around dominate, for getting around tall wizard attacks, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a good point because you don't have to manage your ash economy. Sand cover just becomes a like the perfect defense reaction, essentially.
Yeah, and you just have to count to 3 on the ashes for the whole game.
Yeah,
It's really simple.
fair enough. Yeah, I see you're running kind of a lot of the best cards, right? Like Miraging Metamorph, Snatch, Command and Conquer, Enlighten Strike, Sink Below. I mean, these are all just like, some of the strongest cards in the game. Um, And
Yeah,
running a lot of blues, you can I see you could play like a spears into a CNC or something. Having a lot of blues in this deck really, um, I imagine, opens up what you can afford to cast.
yeah. And against the aggro matchups, I think I reduced my blues by 3. I think the first aura to go is either uh, Shimmers of Silver or Passing Mirage, depending on the matchup. Like in Defy, we might have 3 to 5 poppers, so the Passing Mirage just isn't that good. And then the Shimmers, even though I mean it's an insanely good card in certain situations, into an aggro matchup, it's just gonna get popped immediately, basically. So um, there's not much sense in playing it out. The Pierce Reality and Haze Bending do put in some work in the aggro matchups, though, if they let them stay on the board. And
Gotcha.
then this round is like another blue that blocks for 3, but it can be really helpful into ninjas, especially.
Yeah, especially turn 0 this rounds on me can be a really strong card. Um,
Mm.
all right, is there anything else you would like to talk about just how to go about your different game plans, what you want to do, in the early game, what your late game looks like, do you have any tips for, if I was setting out to play against an aggro deck or a guardian or something, what would you what are some tips or like gameplay tactics you would advise me on?
Sure. So when you're playing against Guardians, Brutes, other decks that go tall down action points and Wizards, you're trying to get to a board state of 2 to 3 ores out. Um, blue or as a Spectra. The burn them all is like icing on the cake, but um, getting 2 to 3 things out with Spectra is your goal. Then after that, you kind of want to hold off on doing that unless they start popping them. Having more than 3 auras out is it's just unneeded, and they're probably going to be swinging at your face um, if they're not popping auras. So uh, having more out doesn't really help you, and you're not going to have 4 cards in hand to swing it because they're going to be coming at you. So the key cards for getting the auras out are going to be Lead the Charge and Mage Master Boots. So Mage Master Boots, sometimes I'll wait till turn 3 to get that tunic counter and use that to pay for boots, and then a great play would be like pop boots, play shimmers, swing shimmers for 5, play another aura. Uh, Whenever you're popping Mage Master Boots, make sure you're playing out 2 auras that turn. That's what it's for. Same with Lead the Charge. Um,
Nice.
and generally, you
I
want,
got a little bit of PTSD when you said shimmers for 5. It made me twitch a
yeah,
little bit.
um, yeah, getting the auras out, like ending your turn, playing an aura, and getting a defense reaction into Arsenal is the best thing to do against the Guardian, especially Bravo, who's just um, yeah, dominating a lot of attacks. So you'd be ready for that. Uh, you kind of view your board state as your win con for those matchups. I think early game they'll be trying to pop auras, and you'll be chipping them down, and then there'll come a point where they just kind of give up when you have 2 to 3 ores on the board and just start coming at you, and that's when you just have to rely on what you have on the board, um, swing for like 4 8, block with the rest, and just rinse repeat until they're out of the game, or they have an off turn where they can't pressure you too hard. Um, the This current list doesn't have Prismatic Shield in it, and that was a card that is really good into the Guardian matchup, but kind of feels like a win more card once you already have
Oh,
2 on the board.
in the list that we're
Oh,
looking
oh,
at right here, there are 2 red prismatic shields.
oh, sorry. Yeah, so my update to the list would be to take out the Prismatic Shields, because I think, well, we can talk about how this lines up with the ban restricted announcement in a bit, but I think the Guardian matchup is already so good. You don't you don't need those cards really. It's the aggressive matchups that are the toughest to deal with.
That's
Um,
interesting because I would have thought that this is the most powerful aura generating card you could use, right? But I guess it's just a win more card, so you don't need it at
Yeah,
all.
I mean, I'm testing it still. Um, but yeah, once you have 2 to 3 out, and especially since burn them all can't be destroyed by your opponent, um, I don't think it's entirely necessary. And if they come in with a pummel or something, you could lose all those shields. Um,
Right. So what
yeah,
happens
and
what happens if a guardian tries to fatigue you, right? Are you just winning that game because once you have multiple auras out, your weapon's stronger than their ability to clear auras?
yeah, I mean, if they're trying to just pop an aura, block out, pop an aura, um, I think you're winning that game because burn them all, especially, is going to turn that tide because you're just pitching a blue and not wasting any cards or having to block and take a damage. Um, and if you can, um, you have to lead the charges also to get 2 auras out, and that puts them really far behind. And then Miraging Metamorph comes in too, so if they're really trying to keep auras off the board, they're just gonna have to take 7 damage because there's so few cards in their deck that don't pop Miraging Metamorph.
I love that
Uh,
play. It's so cheeky. It's so rough.
yeah, and it gets really rough if you have like Pierce Reality or something out too, and it's like, okay,
Uh,
Miraging for 9 coming in. Um,
is
yeah, and then yeah, just another thing about Burn the Ball is you want to make sure that to keep it on the board as long as possible. So um, you have 30 to 30 to 35 reds in the deck, depending on how long you think the game's going to go. Sometimes I'll board in more than 60 cards. So that should give you at least uh, 3 to 4 turns worth of putting counters on Burn Them All. 4 counters on Burn Them All is 10 cards out of your graveyard. Um, so that should give you 5 turns of swinging it 3 times. And that should be enough. Most of the time, if you can get your Burn Them All to 3 counters and then it gets destroyed afterwards, like that's okay.
Nice. Yeah, great
Uh,
value. It's the only aura without Spectra. Um, One thing I'm noticing is every single aura in the deck, Haze Bending, Passing, Pierce, and Shimmers, all get a lot of value out of their abilities as well, which is like pretty interesting. That you're not running a Luminaris deck or a classic Prism deck, but all of these abilities are still very pertinent, with the exception of maybe passing in certain matchups. But it's just nice that these become these powerful weapons that you can pitch to, but also have very pertinent effects. I can see the Iris snowball and what happens to your opponents.
mhm. Yeah, and that's where Piercing Reality, I mean, sorry, Miraging Metamorph really puts in work too, because it's just so much value on the damage, and then yeah, duplicating an aura uh, is just really mean too. That card is uh, borderline busted. We'll see.
It's
Hopefully this
pretty
deck will bust
it's
it,
pretty
right?
busted. At least it doesn't have go again anymore.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's where lead the charge comes in too. You can put that into the aggro matchups and do lead the charge into Miraging. You can do lead the charge into CC. You could lead the charge in Snatch. Um,
So the last card I will point out is Phantasmaclasm, which is a card that I tried to run for a bit in Dragon Dromai, but did not have enough blues to run too many 3 cost cards. However, in your deck that is like blue rich, um, you can now just run all the best expensive cards, and Phantasmaclasm is um, really really above rate. Not only is it just a 3 for 9, but that ability is actually fairly pertinent in getting out your opponent's only popper, or just like putting Revel on the bottom of the deck, or like a key card out of their hand. So I assume this card is puts in a lot of work in the aggro matchups.
it does, yeah. Funny enough, I didn't have it in my list going into the pro quests I played. I was running Phantasmal Symbiosis instead. The the yellow 6 damage 1 cost card. I thought that would be better because of its ability to turn off potential poppers on the Phantasm. But yeah, Phantasm Cloud is just better, and like you said, you have a lot of blues to pay for it. Yeah, that it's kind of the only disruption card you have besides CNC, and it can be really effective. Yeah, pull the blue out of their hand. Yeah, whatever their key card is, um, it can remove. So that is probably, I don't know, it's one of your best weapons into aggro.
Yeah, doesn't get much better rate than 2 for 9.
3 for 9, but yeah,
Oh, I meant 2 cards, yeah.
oh, for sure.
Um, so is you have a couple sections in your notes here about key cards and curious interactions. Is there anything you'd like to highlight that you know, is a curious interaction, like is something that might not be super intuitive or obvious?
Sure, yeah, there's a couple things. Um, Crown of Reflection is something that I usually run into just the wizard matchups, and there is a thing you can do with, like, if you know Burn Them All is going to expire on your turn, you can say swing Burn Them All, and then use Crown to get one of your blue ores with Spectra out, and that usually doesn't have an action point, but since it's just swapping it on the field, you actually get to swing that card also, which is pretty neat, and you get more value out of the Burn Them All because otherwise it would just get destroyed. Um, which is pretty fun. And if you have a haze bending out, that'll make you a spectral shield also, which is pretty neat. Um, Another thing is uh, when you swing your shields, you need to get when you swing your ores, you need to get in the habit of swinging your real ores first. Uh, don't swing. There's no reason to swing your spectral shields first because if you happen to take damage while you're swinging the aura, uh, it can get destroyed. Like say on a reckless swing or like any instant wizard attack or a sigil of suffering. Anytime you take damage and nothing else can absorb that damage, that spectral shield that you're swinging um, prevents the damage. It gets destroyed. It's kind of like when a wizard shoots a dragon out of the sky. Um, the attack doesn't resolve, and you don't get your action point. So
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. Like Steelblade Shunt, any of those, and then Go Grant will not resolve.
right, yeah, and because you're swinging a shield and the shield's a weapon, the steel blade shunt does damage, and it would pop that. So just get in the habit of swing your burden them all first, swing your real ores first.
Good
Uh,
tip. Hot tip.
yeah. And then, well, I guess it doesn't matter anymore, but hypothermia gives it just says your ores are weapons with that have go again. So it actually your weapons don't get turned off by hypothermia, but that doesn't matter anymore.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. I would have thought they would have just because the Iris would be giving it to them, but that's not how that works, which is interesting.
mhm.
Hmm,
um, yeah, but that doesn't matter anymore. So
fair enough. Well, it could someday when Icelander LLs and you're still on this tried and true Iris Dromai deck.
mhm. Yeah, it's a fun deck to play. I think it's even with the ban and restricted announcement and this meta. I think it still has a place. Um, I don't know. Should we move into how things change now with ban and restricted?
Yeah, sure.
Um, so I mean, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see what the meta shakes out to be. But um, I mean, its best matchup Oldhim is probably going to fall off a bit, but that people might just replace that with Bravo, and that's still a good matchup for this deck. So I think it's still got a place there. We might see more dash though, and dash is kind of a problem. At least for me personally, I think the deck just dash is able to answer a lot of the questions that this deck asks of your opponent. Um, like, what do you do about multiple auras? Oh, well, I have these Achilles accelerators and I get multiple action points and clear them. What do you do about these overvalued attacks with Phantasm. Oh, I have 9 poppers. And then it's just a matter in that matchup of recognizing as early as possible, are they trying to go boost dash and go as fast as possible, or are they trying to build a board state? If they're trying to go as fast as possible, you have a pretty good chance of fatiguing them out. But if they're trying to build a board state, especially if they have extra induction chambers and purifiers, you're going to lose that fight because there's not really any deck that can outvalue what Dash does with the whole pistol engine built.
Mhm. Yeah, I would imagine Dash also has the pistol in which she could pop an aura at the end of every turn, or multiple auras when she has additional action points, which, yeah, would be tough.
Right. Yeah. So in that matchup, I tend to board more aggressively. And then if they are trying to do the go fast, then you can a lot of your cards still block for 3, so you can just kind of wait it out. Those max speed turns do suck though, so sometimes it can be hard to hold on, but a lot of times they can just boost themselves out of deck and you'll be all right. And then yeah, I think Phi is still going to be around. I think might be running Gadachis now, which is with hypothermia gone. Katsu could maybe get a place in the meta, especially with the new set coming out. So this deck does struggle in Defy, but it's not an auto loss by any means. I'd say it's like 40-60 or like 45-55. It's 5 favored, but you can still make it. And I think like with Belittle gone, his consistency has declined a little bit until enough people test it and a new optimized list comes out.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that Fi's power level will go down a bit. And yeah, I mean, I could see, on a 3-card hand, if you pitch a blue and play like Dunebreaker Centipede into CNC, that's 11 damage and a very critical hit effect. So while racing Fi is probably not possible, kind of outvaluing Fi when you have access to these large illusionist attacks is definitely a viable strategy.
Yeah, and all of your block for 3s are really important in Defy. I think most of the time Fi is going to be running Masked Momentum, thinking that it's probably going to be a Dragon Dromai, and so that makes the blocking a bit easier. A lot of times it's like blocking the second Ember Blade. I mean, the second Swing Ember Blade, and just let the first thing hit, block the second thing. You probably have to do that twice, maybe 3 times in a turn if you're getting unlucky and they're running hot. But yeah, it's a lot of 2-card, 3-card things that you're coming back at them with insane value.
It does suck when Fi triggers Mask off of your dragons.
Yeah, you
Snatch
don't have
with
to worry
Go
about
Again trigger is the worst. Double draw.
that.
All right. Well, is that it? Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us about this deck?
Well, I think that pretty well covers it. I think, yeah, going forward, it's just I think you have to take away from your favored Guardian matchup and hedge your aggro matchups more. I think that's the direction the meta's going, and I think this deck still can do that and go toe to toe with them if you're having a good day. Might be a little bit more luck needed, more skill needed than you know than you'd like, but not every deck is great into everything. So I
Yeah,
think that's
that's
just
fair.
what we're in now.
Yep. So before we go, are there any more, improvements? Anything you would swap out? Anything you're like considering? I mean, are you, you know, red Ember Moss Centipede? Or is there anything what are you gonna test next?
currently testing running out muscle, just as another popper because the Dromai matchup is so bad, and also as another attack that could possibly get go again into the aggressive matchups. Yeah, a weak point of this deck is that it doesn't have a ton of go again. So you have the Doom Breakers and Spears, and then the E Strike. So the Out Muscle would be another card with go again that would be helpful. I think the blue 3 costed things like Phantasmal Haze, it's really beneficial to have them be 2 costed because you could swing a Spears into something and still have 2 left over to swing that, or if you're swinging something, it gets popped, then you can pay 1 and still be able to swing something for 2. So yeah, I'm just kind of tinkering around the edges here. I'm thinking I'm going to pull Remembrance out because I found it wasn't all that helpful. I was thinking I would need the Burn the Malls back, but the thing about Burn the Mall is you need all the cards in your graveyard to keep it on the board. So if you're already through all your Burn the Balls, you're probably through most of your graveyard anyway.
Yeah, I spent most of the fuel anyway.
Yeah, so my latest iteration has been taking the Prismatic Shields and Remembrance out to put in the Out Muscles. I think it could also be Scar for Scar. Just something to go again. I mean, I'd love to run Ravenous Rabble, but with 30 blues, that doesn't make as much sense as it does for Dromai. And then, yeah, maybe another thing to tinker with would be maybe a different set of gloves. Maybe Arcane Barrier 2 would be acceptable, and you could run something like Goliath Gauntlet if you're really looking to go faster, because that Spectral Shield off of Iris into like Phi or something, like you'll probably get to swing it the first time, and then it's going to be gone after that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mitch. This has been Mitch Danforth's ProQuest Top 8 Iris Dromai Deck Tech. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. Thanks, Colin. Yeah.
And we'll see you all next time with more Attack Action Podcast videos. Hit the like and subscribe, please. It helps us out a lot. And have a good day, everyone.